Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais with another episode of the Yakking Show, Harmony, your Path to Wholeness channel. And as always, we have interesting guests. Today will be no exception. Our aim with this channel is to bring you expert guests on various aspects of leading a wholesome life, diet, health, and a lot of other things. But first, let's introduce co-host Kathleen Beauvais. Hi, Kathleen. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you so much. And thank you also very much for tuning into our show. We so appreciate having you. And today we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic, and it's one that not many people talk about, but is so important. And that is the topic of grief. And today we have a very privileged to welcome to the show Emily Thiroux Threatt to the show. Hello, Emily. How are you?
Oh, aloha. I'm just great. Thank you very much.
And we must add that you're coming to us from Hawaii, aren't you?
That's right.
Now, Emily is the founder and CEO of the Grief and Happiness Alliance. She's a speaker on grief-related topics, as well as the author of the book, Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief. So, Emily, the alliance you formed combines two words that seem absolutely polar opposite, and that is grief and happiness. You mentioned that is both, it's possible to be both grieving and to also be happy simultaneously. Can you explain that?
Actually, that's a very natural, normal place to be in life, and people don't always recognize that. A lot of times when people are dealing with grief, they feel like they have to grieve all the time. They have to be serious. They can't smile. They get teary, they don't talk a lot. And that's kind of the perception people have of the grieving person, where in real life, we're still people who it's very healthy to smile and to laugh and to enjoy your life. And that's something that it's kind of my mission to spread that's okay. That please do smile, please do be happy and make the best out of your life.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So, how long does grief generally last, Emily? And at what point of time do experts like yourself say, that's it, and it's now getting too long? Is there a time limit?
No.
Okay.
My belief is that when you love someone and they die, you will grieve for them the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. Because they're still gone. You still can't be with them. And it's okay to grieve like that. They're in your heart, but you can be happy with them in your heart. And chances are they most likely would want you to be happy.
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm.
And so that there's not a time limit on grief. There's different things that you experience when you're grieving, and some are harder to go through than others, but they come and go for years, and that's okay. What you find is as you move, excuse me, as you move forward, you don't spend as much time in that mm-hmm. darker place and in that real sadness, and you come through that more quickly. And so it's less and less that you feel like you're actively grieving, where as long as you're holding them in your heart, you're grieving.
Sure.
And that's okay.
Sure. Sorry, can I jump in with a follow-up to that, Kathleen, if you don't mind? Emily, does it affect the grieving process, the circumstances of the loved one's death? In other words, if it's sudden compared to if the person dies from a drawn-out illness, is the process different or not necessarily, or yes and no?
Every time someone dies, it's different.
Okay.
So yes, if someone dies suddenly in a car accident or in a fire like we just had here on Maui, mm-hmm. where so many people perished in not a matter of a couple of hours, you're going to respond to that differently than when somebody's been having a terminal illness for years and finally gets released from that illness. Mm-hmm. So mm-hmm. Each situation with each person is different.
Right. Thank you.
And is there a moment in time where you would say, yeah, you're right, the grieving process will always continue, but is there a way, is it possible where grieving actually becomes so unhealthy because the person just can't seem to move on?
Sure. If someone gets stuck in grief, it can become a complicated grief, and it's best if they get professional help and support that's beyond just what they can do on their own, with going to grief groups or having whatever they do to help themselves through their grief.
Right. Right. And when we talk about grief, most people generally think of grief following a death, but in fact, you can experience grief from many other different events, such as a divorce, for instance. I hear that the body, and I've learned this, that the body experiences or reacts to grief the same way, regardless of the event. So what would be your advice to help people look after themselves physically during the grieving process?
The first thing I always tell someone when they ask me, what am I supposed to do, or how do I handle this, is to practice good self-care. When you do that, when you make sure that you're eating wisely, because sometimes people just binge eat like crazy and gain a lot of weight, or they don't eat and lose a lot of weight. Those two things are very, very common. Frequently, they have a hard time getting out of bed, or an early grief. And if that doesn't get better, where it's easier for you to get out of bed and go about your day, then that's an issue. Or some people don't bathe. I've known people that you can tell they're not bathing, they're not dealing with what's going on. So self-care, which includes going outside, breathing fresh air, talking to people, trying to have actually having the best you can in every moment.
You've answered what I was going to ask you, but that triggered something else in my mind. That do you find, particularly with the death of a spouse, that the surviving spouse holds back on starting to enjoy his or her life because of some sense of guilt that they have either they've been abandoned or they have abandoned the one who's departed? Is that a thing?
Sometimes. Again, every time, everything is individual.
It's different. Sure.
It will be, all the circumstances would make a big difference. I've had lots of people die in my life. Most of my relatives, my parents, my sister, lots of friends. That's, the longer you live, the more death you have dealt with in your life. And each one of them is different. But I can say with my two husbands that died, those were the hardest ones for me.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine. Kathleen, sorry, back to you, Kathleen.
So I'd like for us to explore this notion of anticipatory grief. This is where you begin to feel grief before the event actually happens. And I can say with 100% certainty, I'm very much guilty of this. I lost my dad in 2020, and although we knew it was going to happen, it was just like you're just waiting and waiting and waiting. But even now that is now over, it seems like there's always this sense of impending doom right here. I don't know how to overcome that, but according to you, is this a healthy step, or can it push us into living in a life of fear?
Well, first, when you mentioned about anticipatory grief and you said you're guilty, don't take it that way. Because whatever you experience is what you experience in the grieving process. And it's not something to feel guilty about. It's not something to regret that you're grieving or to feel bad that you're grieving. Look at it as something that's part of life. It's perfectly natural, and you're going to experience it multiple times. Anticipatory grief, which you were mentioning, happens when someone is usually ill for a long time, or there's some circumstances, or that like dementia is, there are so many different kinds of dementia. People think it's just Alzheimer's, but there are lots of different kinds of dementia. And you can be losing that person while they're still alive, because their personality, their self is fading away, usually gradually. And that would be a good example of anticipatory grief.
Right.
Interesting. The old saying, "Time heals all wounds." Does that apply? I think from what you've already said, it does. But in the early stages of grief, thinking back to my own experience, parents, it takes a while to accept that. Correct. So, how do you help people with that?
Well, for one thing, when you say heal, that implies that it gets over.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at it as something that doesn't get over, that's something that you will find a healthy way to deal with it,
Right.
then that would be more like what I think you're expressing with healing.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Quite correct. Quite correct. Yeah. Certainly, I found that.
Right.
Kathleen, back to you, Kathleen.
Many people get swept into the cycle of grief, and the healing doesn't seem to be achieved. Like we said, sometimes people are just so drawn into grieving. Do you think that grief is a choice?
I wouldn't say grief is a choice, but because everybody grieves, but how you deal with your grief can be a choice. And early on, it can feel like it's not a choice at all, like you don't have any control, because if you had control, your loved one wouldn't have died.
Right.
So, but you are in that situation because your loved one has died. And so you have to, I shouldn't say have to. What you could do that could help you the most is to recognize it, deal with it, be gentle with your grief. Don't look at it as an enemy or or something that's trying to hurt you, but look at it as a way that you can actually find comfort.
Right. So tell us about your book.
Well, I've got a couple of books. You mentioned my first one, Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief, that came out in 21. But my most recent book, The Grief and Happiness Handbook, came out just this last June.
Excellent.
And yeah, it's been really successful. It's an international bestseller already.
Oh, very good. Good.
And I've gotten such wonderful comments on it, because it covers things that other books don't cover. There's 26 chapters in it. You don't have to read them in order. You can look at the table of contents and see something and say, that's what I need to think about today, or that's what I want to look at today. And it's also a workbook. So at the end of each chapter, it gives you things that you can write as you reflect on that chapter, right in the book.
Excellent. Excellent. Now, how do people get it?
It's on Amazon, and
Okay.
you can get it at traditional bookstores. They may need to order it because bookstores don't stock everything.
Yeah.
But I like to support bookstores, so you can just go in and say,
Sure.
this is the book I want, and they'll get it for you.
Now, can you tell us the title of that book one more time?
The Grief and Happiness Handbook.
The Grief and Happiness Handbook. Fantastic.
Got it. Excellent.
Yeah.
So,
Is there, sorry, Peter, I just want
no,
to in because we're talking about the book. Can you give us maybe some of the tips that you impart in some of those books? In your two books?
There's so many things. A couple things that are kind of unusual are, I talk about music and I talk about dance. And that usually isn't equated with grief, but they are both ways that you can deal with grief. And so I'll talk about that too. And of course, I cover things like gratitude, because that's a huge part of grief, is dealing with gratitude. And there's a chapter in it called Crying in the Car. And I think I've had more people speak to me about that chapter than anything else, because they think they're the only one that cries in the car.
Okay.
But the car is a private place where you can go and nobody else is going to hear you or see you sob or scream or tears or whatever it is that you do. And when they recognize that it's okay to be in a safe place and express their emotions, releasing those emotions can help you be able to take a deep breath and move forward.
And is that maybe
Interesting.
the process of dance as well? It just helps the releasing of these emotions.
Yeah, and physically, really, with your body, because you can tense up and hold things tight in your body, and that wears you out. You'll get tired, you'll get sore from doing that sort of thing. And if you dance and just can move with the music, be able to release those high tension feelings in a way that, again, you can take a deep breath.
Right.
Very good. Here's one for you. Do you notice cultural or generational differences in how people handle grief?
Absolutely. There are so many things that are so different. After Ron died, I went on a trip to Bali because I'd always wanted to go, and I went there to study ceramics and making them, and it was a fabulous trip. But I learned about their culture there, that they can only bury people on certain days of the month in certain cycles. And so if they don't have the money to bury them up front at the beginning, when they're supposed to be buried according to their culture and tradition, they put them in a place. There's a monkey forest there. And there's a big place in the monkey forest where they will temporarily bury people until it's the right time of the month, and they can pay for it.
Okay.
So that's like entirely different than anything I'd heard before about dying. And different cultures have different things. Like the way that in India, they'll have a funeral pyre that's on like a raft that they put it out into the water as the body burns, and that happens there. And that's what happens for all of them. So each culture has their own traditions, their own beliefs about what's going on with death and how it's appropriate to grieve. I've done a lot of theater in my life, and I directed the play The House of Bernarda Alba, which is a Spanish play by Yorca. And I might not be pronouncing that right. It's about a woman and all of her female children. All of her children were female. And when her husband died, she and all of her children had to wear black for the rest of their lives.
Wow.
And they couldn't leave their house. Like food had to be brought to them. They didn't have guests or anything. It was just, they were there with it. So all the girls, none of them had been married yet. They couldn't have love. They couldn't get married. They couldn't do any, but that was their tradition in that culture. That's what they did. And that was years ago. I'm sure they don't do that now, or I hope they don't do that now, but the variety of the way people deal with death and grief is great. Very big.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Quite a difference indeed. Yeah, quick one. I grew up, you could hear from my accent, I'm not a native North American. I grew up in Africa and lived through a terrorist war in Rhodesia and had very close encounters with death. And we actually became quite cynical. I went to 4 funerals in a week the once, and we just had to get on with it. Did that do us long-term irreparable harm? I actually don't know, but it was a case of, well, and even people we knew well, they're dead, but we got to move on and get over it very quickly. And that was our sort of culture, to get over it very, very quickly. Yeah, interesting. So, wow. How are people managing now? You mentioned we have asked you about Maui a little earlier. You said people are coming together and they're certainly getting over it. Are there lessons there?
I would say they're not getting over it.
Okay, sorry, I didn't want to put words in your mouth. Coming to terms with it?
Yeah, coming to terms, maybe. It's still unbelievable. It's so unreal that we had this historical community that was like the base of history in Maui, but also for Hawaii, because that's where this community is, where the government of Hawaii started.
Mm-hmm.
And the families that lived there, kind of in compounds that several generations all lived together. And some of them, their whole family was wiped out,
Wow.
or parts of the family were wiped out, and all their land, their traditions, their memories, it's gone. It was leveled within a matter of a few hours. It was all gone.
Wow.
It was very, very fast. So it was shocking.
Sure.
You deal with shock and kind of horror thinking about it. I was thinking about how it wasn't that long ago that I was walking down that street, and it could have been me just as easy as anybody else. And we think about those kinds of things. But in the process, people just showed so much love and so much support. The community came together, but not only that, all the people around the world that have come to Maui and love Maui and see it as a special place were very generous in donating things. Of course, there's still things that people need when you have like the people now who had their house burned down. The rents, we were already didn't have enough housing for the people who live here on the island. So trying to find a place was hard. The rents are very high, but they have to pay their mortgage on their home that they don't have anymore at the same time.
Yeah. Wow. Is there any rebuilding yet?
There's so much that has to be done before they can actually build.
Okay. Wow.
Because there's lots of hazardous issues. Everything has to, there's so much cleanup that has to be done before they could even consider building on a lot of the places that were burned.
Wow. Oh dear. Wow.
Now, you are a speaker, as I introduced you, a speaker on grief-related topics. What have you, what sort of topics have you discussed or talked about with people?
My main thing that I do with people is show them how writing can help them to deal with their grief. And the Grief and Happiness Alliance that you mentioned, we have a gathering on Zoom every week, and it doesn't cost anything because we also created a nonprofit organization that can fund it, because we don't want people to have to pay to deal with their grief. And so we get together and write. We write about different subjects every week. And then we talk about it in small groups so people can be heard and tell their stories. And then they learn a happiness practice every week. And I feel strongly about happiness and showing people ways they can be happy.
Oh, fantastic. So so people can just go to your website to find out how to join this free alliance. And, oh my goodness, I would encourage everybody to do that. And so how do people contact you, Emily?
My website is emily@griefandhappiness.com. Everything about me is grief and happiness. So, and then the Grief and Happiness Alliance is the website for that is griefandhappiness.com. So it's easy to remember. With my email is emily@griefandhappiness.com, and the website is griefandhappiness.com. And if you look there, you can see what the nonprofit is all about. You'll see when we have special events, they'll be there. We have a weekly newsletter where you can got lots of good information in it every week that you can read or listen to, because I have a podcast and I always post them in the newsletter so that you can listen to those. And it's really kind of wonderful the way people have come together to support what we're doing, and the people that partake in it. When new people come in, we have people from different parts of the world come to these Zoom meetings, and they'll stay up late at night or get up early in the morning, depending on their time zone, to come, so that we can all be together. And when new people come in, we introduce everybody that's there, and the people that have been coming for a while say, I wouldn't miss it. I'm here every Sunday and I love this, and I love the support, and I love the people I'm getting to know. And a lot of times when people are grieving, they might be the only one in their circle of people that they associate with that are in that kind of grief at that time. And so it feels really good to these people to be around people who get them.
Yes.
Who,
Yes.
Absolutely. So if there's anyone out there listening today and is going through a horrible grief, what advice would you have for them listening today?
the first thing I kind of mentioned earlier is to take care of themselves,
Mhm.
to pay attention to self-care. That is the very most important thing.
Right.
Good. Emily, question on your website for our audio listeners: grief and happiness with the word "and" between grief and happiness?
Yes, grief and
Okay.
happiness.
So to audio listeners, full details will be in the description on whatever platform you are listening to this on. Thanks for that, Emily. Back to you, Kathleen.
Oh. Well, Emily, thank you so much for being with us today. This was a great and important topic to talk about. So thank you. And thank you all again for tuning into our show. If anyone is interested in being a guest on our show, please visit us at theyakkingshow.com. All you need to do is click on the contacts tab where you will find a short application form. And Peter, maybe you want to talk about our newsletter.
Absolutely. As every week, we bring you interesting guests, and today was certainly no exception. To make sure you don't miss out on our future guests and to hear about each week, sign up for our newsletter. There's a short form on our website, yakkingshow.com. We only send you one email a week. We don't inundate your inbox. Don't miss out. That's it for me. Thank you again to Emily. Thanks to listeners and watchers, viewers, for being with us. Bye for now.
All right. Until next time, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Aloha.